Abandoned Hospital. Part 1. Entering the Unknown. I always prided myself on not believing in ghosts. Supernatural stories were just that, stories. So when my friends dared me to spend a night in the old, abandoned St. Mary's Hospital, I took it as an opportunity to prove once and for all that the only thing to fear in this world was our own imagination. They told tales of the cruel experiments conducted on the patients and the restless spirits that now haunted the halls. It was all nonsense to me. The hospital sat at the edge of town, a dilapidated relic of the past. Its windows were shattered, and the walls were covered in graffiti and ivy. I arrived just before sunset, armed with nothing but a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and my phone. The heavy iron gates creaked as I pushed them open, the sound echoing through the deserted grounds. I hesitated for a moment, taking in the eerie silence. The wind rustled through the overgrown weeds, creating a symphony of whispers. I steeled myself and walked up the crumbling steps to the main entrance. The door was slightly ajar, and with a deep breath, I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of decay and dust. The light from my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a reception area that had long been abandoned. Old medical records and papers were scattered across the floor, and the paint on the walls was peeling away in large chunks. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The stories my friends had told me lingered in my mind, but I brushed them aside. This was just an old building, and the only danger here was the possibility of the floor giving way beneath me. As I explored further, I found myself in what must have been the main ward. Rows of rusted bed frames lined the walls, and the remnants of old medical equipment were scattered about. A chill ran down my spine, but I told myself it was just the cold night air seeping in through the broken windows. I decided to set up camp in one of the smaller rooms off the main hall. It seemed less likely to collapse, and the door still had a functioning lock. I rolled out my sleeping bag and sat down, pulling out my phone to check the time. It was just past 9 p.m. I had a long night ahead of me. I spent the next few hours exploring the hospital, trying to keep myself occupied. The place was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one more decrepit than the last. In one room, I found an old, rusted wheelchair, its wheels squeaking as I nudged it with my foot. In another, a stack of ancient medical journals covered in mold and dust. As midnight approached, I returned to my makeshift camp. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the distant creak of settling wood. I lay down in my sleeping bag, pulling it up to my chin. I was determined to get some sleep, despite the unsettling atmosphere. Just as I was drifting off, a faint noise caught my attention. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on a door. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound seemed to be coming from down the hall. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, moving cautiously towards the source of the noise. As I approached the end of the hall, the tapping grew louder and more insistent. I stopped in front of a door that was slightly ajar, the sound now just on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Inside was a small office, its walls lined with filing cabinets and old medical charts. At the center of the room stood a desk, and sitting behind it was a shadowy figure. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I was not alone. The figure looked up, and I saw the hollow eyes of a man in a doctor's coat, his face gaunt and pale. He was tapping a pen on the desk, a look of deep sadness etched into his features. As our eyes met, he stopped and pointed to a file lying open in front of him. I stepped closer, my hands trembling. The file was filled with notes and photographs of patients, detailing the horrific experiments they had been subjected to. The doctor's ghostly form flickered, and he began to speak, his voice a raspy whisper. "They were my patients," he said. "I tried to help them, but the experiments, they were too cruel. We were all trapped in this nightmare." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The stories were true. The spirits of the hospital's past were still here, and they wanted their story to be told. I backed away slowly, unable to tear my eyes from the doctor's mournful gaze. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me, and I struggled to open it, my hands slipping on the cold metal handle. When I finally managed to wrench it open, I bolted down the hall, the doctor's words echoing in my mind. Back in my camp, I tried to calm my racing heart. The hospital was more than just an old building. It was a tomb for the souls who had suffered within its walls. I knew I couldn't leave now. Not until I understood the full story of what had happened here. The night was far from over, and I had a feeling that the spirits had much more to show me. Part 2. Echoes of the Past. I sat in my sleeping bag, trying to steady my breathing. The encounter with the ghostly doctor had shaken me to my core. The hospital, once just a decaying building to me, had transformed into a place of torment and lingering despair. My curiosity had led me here, but now fear threatened to overwhelm me. I decided to keep moving. Staying still made me feel vulnerable, like I was waiting for something to happen. Grabbing my flashlight, I ventured back into the hallway. The air felt colder, and the darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides. I turned a corner and found myself in a long corridor lined with patient rooms. Most of the doors were closed, but one at the end of the hall was slightly ajar. A flickering light came from within, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I approached cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I pushed the door open, the light revealed a small, cluttered room. An old television set in the corner was flickering with static, casting an otherworldly glow. On the bed lay a figure, covered by a thin, tattered blanket. I stepped closer, and the figure sat up suddenly, revealing a gaunt, hollow-eyed woman. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she began to speak in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "They took us one by one," she said. "Promised us cures, but all we got was pain. Endless pain." I felt a lump in my throat as I listened to her story. She described the experiments in gruesome detail. The injections, the surgeries, the electric shocks. The doctors had pushed the boundaries of medical ethics, all in the name of science. But instead of curing diseases, they had created a living hell for their patients. The woman's voice grew weaker, and she lay back down, her form fading into the sheets. The television flickered off, plunging the room into darkness. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I had just witnessed. The spirits were trapped in their suffering, and they wanted someone to know their pain. Leaving the room, I continued down the hall. Each step felt heavier, the weight of the hospital's history pressing down on me. I passed more patient rooms, each one silent and still. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker with each passing moment. I reached another door. This one marked operating room. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was large, filled with rusted surgical equipment and stained operating tables. The air was thick with the scent of decay and old blood. As I moved through the room, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see a ghostly figure of a surgeon, his hands covered in spectral blood. He was focused intently on the table before him, where the faint outline of a patient lay. The surgeon looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. "They said it was for the greater good," he muttered, almost to himself. "But the things we did, we lost ourselves in the process." I watched as he replayed the motions of a long-forgotten surgery, his hands moving through the air as if guided by some unseen force. The patient's ghostly form writhed in silent agony, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The surgeon's figure faded, leaving me alone in the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital was alive, its very walls soaked with the anguish of those who had suffered here. The ghosts were not just reliving their past, they were trying to make me understand the horrors they had endured. I left the operating room and continued exploring. The deeper I went into the hospital, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. I found myself in what must have been the psychiatric ward, the walls lined with padded cells. The doors were all open, swinging gently on their hinges. I stepped into one of the cells, the padded walls muffling the sound of my footsteps. The room was cold and empty, but I could feel the presence of its former occupants. Their pain and despair clung to the air like a thick fog. As I stood there, the temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath forming in front of me. A whispering chorus filled the room, voices overlapping in a cacophony of anguish. "Help us!" they pleaded. "Remember us!" I backed out of the cell, the whispers growing louder. The spirits were all around me now, their forms flickering in and out of existence. Faces twisted in pain, eyes filled with despair. They reached out to me, their ghostly hands grasping at the air. I stumbled back into the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. The ghosts were relentless, their cries echoing in my mind. I needed to get out of there, to find some way to escape the nightmare that had consumed the hospital. But as I turned to leave, I heard a voice, clearer and more distinct than the others. "Wait," it said. "There's something you need to see." I turned back, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. At the end of the hall, a figure stood, beckoning me forward. I hesitated, but something in their eyes compelled me to follow. They led me to a staircase, descending into the depths of the hospital. With each step, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to deepen. The whispers followed me, urging me on. I reached the bottom of the stairs and found myself in a dimly lit basement. The figure pointed to a door at the far end, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices urging me to open it. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and stepped inside. What I found on the other side would haunt me forever. Part 3. The Depths of Despair. The basement room was unlike any other I had seen in the hospital. It was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and something else, something more sinister. Strange symbols and markings covered the walls, their meaning lost to time, but their presence deeply unsettling. In the center of the room stood an old operating table, stained and rusted with age. Surrounding it were shelves filled with jars of murky liquids and preserved specimens that looked more like horrors from a nightmare than anything belonging to this world. The room felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. I took a hesitant step forward, my flashlight beam dancing across the grotesque displays. The whispers had quieted to a low hum, as if the spirits were holding their breath, waiting for me to uncover the final piece of their tragic story. I moved closer to the table, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the bulb overhead flickered violently before going out entirely. I was plunged into darkness, my flashlight the only source of light. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, trying to find a way out. But the door was locked, and no amount of pushing or pulling would budge it. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath in the faint beam of my flashlight. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room with their mournful cries. "You must know," they seemed to say. "You must understand." A cold breeze brushed past me, and I turned to see a figure standing by the operating table. It was the ghostly form of a young woman, her face twisted in pain and sorrow. She wore a tattered hospital gown, and her eyes were hollow and empty. She reached out to me, her voice a soft whisper that cut through the noise. "Help us," she pleaded. "Release us." I felt a surge of compassion for her and the other spirits trapped in this place. They had endured unimaginable suffering, their lives stolen by the cruel experiments conducted here. I stepped closer, my flashlight revealing more of the room's horrific contents. Among the jars and specimens, I saw old medical files and photographs, documenting the experiments in gruesome detail. The young woman's ghost pointed to a file lying open on the table. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I read the contents. It was a record of the experiments, detailing the horrific procedures and their devastating effects on the patients. The file named the lead doctor responsible, a man driven by a twisted desire to push the boundaries of medical science, no matter the cost. As I read, the whispers grew louder, and more ghostly figures appeared around me. They were the spirits of the patients, their faces contorted in agony and despair. They reached out to me, their eyes begging for release. I understood then that the only way to free them was to expose the truth, to bring the horrors of St. Mary's Hospital to light. Determined, I gathered as many files and photographs as I could carry, stuffing them into my backpack. The spirits watched me, their expressions shifting from pain to hope. I could feel their gratitude, their longing for justice and peace. With a final nod to the young woman, I turned to leave the room. The door, which had been locked tight moments before, swung open easily. I stepped into the hallway, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The whispers followed me, guiding me back up the stairs and through the maze of corridors. I moved quickly, my heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. As I reached the main entrance, I paused, looking back at the hospital one last time. The spirits stood in the shadows watching me. I could feel their eyes on me, their silent pleas urging me to keep my promise. I stepped outside, the cold night air filling my lungs. The walk back to my car was a blur. I felt a sense of urgency, a need to get the files to someone who could help. I drove straight to the local police station, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I knew that what I had seen and experienced would be hard to believe, but I had to try. At the station, I told the officers everything, showing them the files and photographs as proof. They listened, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock as they realized the truth of my story. They promised to investigate, to uncover the full extent of the horrors that had taken place at St. Mary's Hospital. As I left the station, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The spirits of the hospital had entrusted me with their story, and I had done my best to honor their memories. I hoped that, with the truth finally coming to light, they would find the peace they so desperately deserved. Driving away from the police station, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the young woman's ghostly figure standing by the side of the road, a look of gratitude on her face. I blinked, and she was gone, but the sense of her presence lingered. I knew that the journey was far from over. The investigation would take time, and there would be challenges ahead. But I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to see justice served for the spirits of St. Mary's Hospital. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, I drove towards the future, leaving the haunted past behind me. Part 4. Shadows of the Past. In the days that followed, the investigation into St. Mary's Hospital intensified. News of the horrific experiments in the haunted hospital spread quickly, and soon the town was buzzing with reporters and curious onlookers. The files and photographs I had brought to the police were undeniable proof of the atrocities that had been committed, and the authorities vowed to uncover the full truth. Despite the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that my involvement with the hospital was far from over. The spirits had shown me their pain, and I had promised to help them find peace. As I watched the news reports and followed the investigation, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. One night as I was lying in bed, I heard a faint whisper. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but the whisper grew louder, calling my name. I sat up, my heart pounding. The air in my room felt cold, and I could see my breath. The spirits were reaching out to me again. I followed the whisper to my living room, where the temperature was even colder. In the dim light, I saw the faint outline of the young woman's ghost. She looked at me with pleading eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You must return," she said softly. "There is more you need to see." Despite my fear, I knew I had to go back to the hospital. The spirits were still trapped, their stories unfinished. I grabbed my flashlight and my backpack, and without hesitation, I headed back to St. Mary's. The streets were deserted as I drove, the town's residents too afraid to venture near the haunted building. I arrived at the hospital just before midnight. The building loomed in the darkness, its broken windows and crumbling walls casting eerie shadows. I pushed open the heavy iron gates and made my way inside. The air was thick with the scent of decay and dust, just as it had been before. As I moved through the halls, the whispers grew louder, guiding me deeper into the hospital. I passed the reception area, the main ward, and the operating room, each space filled with the lingering presence of the spirits. They watched me from the shadows, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. The whispers led me to a part of the hospital I hadn't explored before. The walls were lined with old photographs and medical charts, documenting the lives of the patients who had suffered here. I felt a pang of sadness as I looked at their faces, knowing the horrors they had endured. I reached a door marked Records Room and pushed it open. Inside, the room was filled with filing cabinets and stacks of papers. The air was musty, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. I began to sift through the files, looking for anything that could help the spirits find peace. As I searched, I found a series of letters written by the lead doctor, the man responsible for the experiments. The letters detailed his growing obsession with pushing the boundaries of medical science, his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in the pursuit of knowledge. They also revealed his deepening guilt and fear as the experiment spiraled out of control. One letter, in particular, caught my attention. It was addressed to the hospital board, begging for forgiveness and detailing a plan to end the experiments and release the patients. But the board had ignored his pleas, driven by the promise of groundbreaking discoveries and the potential for profit. I realized that the spirits weren't just looking for justice. They wanted the truth to be known. They wanted the world to understand the full extent of their suffering and the betrayal they had experienced. I gathered the letters and other documents, stuffing them into my backpack. As I turned to leave, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around to see the young woman's ghost standing behind me. She looked at me with sad eyes, and I felt a wave of compassion wash over me. "Thank you," she whispered. "But there is one more thing you must do." She led me to a small room at the back of the records office. Inside, I found an old safe, its door slightly ajar. I opened it and found a collection of personal items: photographs, letters, and keepsakes belonging to the patients. These were the last remnants of their lives, the only things they had left when they were taken to the hospital. I took the items and placed them in my backpack. The young woman's ghost watched me, a look of gratitude on her face. "These must be returned to their families," she said. "They deserve to know the truth." I nodded, understanding the importance of her request. The personal items were a tangible connection to the patients' lives, a way to honor their memories and acknowledge their suffering. I promised to return them to the families, to share their stories, and bring closure to their loved ones. As I left the hospital, the spirits followed me, their whispers a mixture of hope and relief. I felt a sense of purpose, knowing that I was helping to bring peace to those who had suffered for so long. The journey was far from over, but I was determined to see it through. Back at home, I began the painstaking process of identifying the families of the patients and reaching out to them. It was a difficult and emotional task, but it was also deeply rewarding. Each family I contacted was grateful for the information and the personal items, their tears a testament to the impact of the hospital's dark history. The investigation continued, and the authorities uncovered more evidence of the atrocities committed at St. Mary's. The hospital became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of ethical standards in medicine. The spirit stories were finally being heard, and justice was being served. As the weeks went by, I felt a sense of closure. The young woman's ghost visited me one last time, her form faint and ethereal. She smiled at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "We can finally rest." With that, she faded away, her presence leaving a sense of peace in its wake. The spirits of St. Mary's Hospital had found their justice and their peace, and I had played a part in making it happen. Part 5. Rest and Revelation. The weeks turned into months, and the investigation into St. Mary's Hospital reached its conclusion. The full extent of the atrocities committed there was brought to light, and those responsible were held accountable. The town, once shrouded in mystery and fear, began to heal. The families of the patients received the personal items I had found, and each one reacted with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Many of them had never known what happened to their loved ones, and while the truth was painful, it brought a sense of closure. They were finally able to mourn and remember the people who had been taken from them. As for me, life slowly returned to normal. The spirits no longer haunted my dreams or whispered in the darkness. I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that I had fulfilled my promise to them. The young woman's ghost, in particular, lingered in my thoughts. Her gratitude and trust had been a powerful motivator, and I hoped she had found the rest she deserved. One evening, as I was reflecting on the events that had unfolded, I received a call from one of the families. They wanted to meet and thank me in person. I agreed, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Meeting these people face to face would be emotional, but it was an important part of the healing process. We met at a local cafe, and as we sat down, I could see the weight of their grief and the relief of closure in their eyes. They shared stories of their loved ones, painting a picture of lives filled with joy, dreams, and aspirations. It was a stark contrast to the horrors they had endured in the hospital, and it made the tragedy all the more poignant. As we talked, I realized that the spirits of St. Mary's had given me a gift. They had shown me the importance of empathy, compassion, and the power of truth. Their stories had changed me, made me more aware of the suffering that can exist beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary places. When the meeting ended, I felt a deep sense of connection to these families. We had shared something profound, and I knew that their loved ones' memories would live on in their hearts. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The hospital itself became a memorial, a place where people could come to remember and honor those who had suffered there. The town decided to turn it into a museum, preserving its history and ensuring that the lessons learned would not be forgotten. It was a fitting tribute, a way to ensure that the spirit's stories would continue to be heard. I visited the museum on its opening day. Walking through the halls, I saw the photographs, letters, and artifacts that had once been hidden away. Each display told a piece of the story, bringing the past to life in a way that was both haunting and beautiful. The spirits of St. Mary's had found their voice, and their stories would continue to touch the lives of all who visited. As I stood in front of a photograph of the young woman's ghost, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Her eyes, once filled with pain and sorrow, seemed to shine with a quiet strength. I knew that she and the other spirits had finally found the rest they deserved. Leaving the museum, I took one last look at the building that had changed my life. It was no longer a place of fear and darkness, but a symbol of resilience and hope. The whispers had faded, replaced by the soft hum of visitors learning about the past and honoring the memories of those who had suffered. In the end, the spirits of St. Mary's Hospital had found justice and peace. Their stories had been heard and their pain acknowledged. And I too had been changed by the experience, carrying their lessons with me as I moved forward. As I walked away from the museum, I felt a sense of closure. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. The spirits were at rest, and I could finally put the past behind me. I knew that their stories would continue to inspire and remind us all of the importance of compassion, empathy, and the power of truth. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and peace, I walked into the future, leaving the haunted past behind.